Almost every village now has its own warehouse or depot, and the village office is also the branch of the bank. The cooperative bank makes loans to cocoa marketing societies through their district unions, and these give seasonal credit to their members, which is repaid at harvest time. The farmer's cocoa is taken from the village drying mat to the society's shed, where the beans are weighed, honest weights, tested for quality, and graded. The farmer is paid on the spot. The part of the money he wants to draw, the balance is left as a deposit, which he draws later in bits as he needs it. Cooperative marketing business is efficient, democratic, and popular. That is why it is successful. The society's lorry takes the cocoa to the union warehouse, and from there, the cocoa goes down to the coast, from where most of it is.
This is something of the war effort from the Gold Coast of West Africa, manufacture of soap from cocoa beans. Something of a surprise item for our American visitors who think we make our coffee from soap. Unfortunately, it all looks rather a mess, but so do most processes of manufacture at some stage or the other, and anyway, you don't have to eat it. There's no point in going into a long description of what they're doing or how it's done, because you're never likely to get enough cocoa beans to do it at home. But it's nice to see that the war effort is being pushed ahead, even in these remote corners of our empire. Sappers of the Gold Coast Regiment training in the important job of getting transport across rivers. Since this war started, we've seen many pictures of making pontoon bridges and crossing streams in collapsible boats. Undoubtedly, it's a vital adjunct of military tactics, but there's no doubt that when we get to Venice, it'll seem like a home from home.
This is the Gaumont British News, presenting the world to the world. Church House, Westminster, sees the official opening of Britain's first colonial mount, with a governor's escort of Gold Coast police forming a guard of honor for the arrival of the King and Queen.
Nkrumah's hopes for colonial independence had begun during World War II. United States President Franklin Roosevelt had secured from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill a promise that all nations of the world would be allowed to chart their own political course. Churchill didn't realize it at the time, but it was the beginning of the end for European colonialism.
A new power was on the world scene, the United States of America. And it faced a world which had already been containerized by the European powers. And it said, open up, unlock, we want in. And that unlocking was independence from the American point of view.
As World War II drew to a close, the United Nations was formed. It would provide a forum where nations could meet to address issues of mutual concern. Among the founding principles of this new organization was a declaration of support for political freedom and independence. The colonial powers of Europe vastly underestimated the power this would have.
When I first joined the UN in 1945, I was astonished at particularly the British Foreign Office. And people would say, well, decolonization is a small matter, you know, 100 years, 150 years, maybe. Well, actually, it took 20.
Colonialism, of course, is the absolute enemy of open economies and of free trade. Colonialism is about anything. It's about managing economies, restricting access, either formally or informally. And it emphasizes the importance of Africa as a producer of raw materials.
Known to Europeans and Americans for centuries as the Dark Continent, by the late 1880s, European nations had colonized virtually all of Africa. In 1884, they met in Berlin to draw up the political boundaries of their colonies. These boundaries seldom had much to do with the realities of Africa.
This, of course, meant that in some instances they split peoples. In other instances, it meant that people who had been fighting each other before the map was drawn, were now put into one administrative unit. Of course, the Europeans could all play on that in order to keep the peace.
During the Second World War, the Europeans had recruited their colonial subjects to the war effort. African conscripts were not always well treated. In 1948, in the Gold Coast's capital, Accra, disgruntled ex-soldiers demonstrated for fair pay for their wartime service. A number were shot and killed by colonial police, sparking riots across the country. One of those imprisoned without trial in the aftermath of the rioting was Kwame Nkrumah. He had just returned from England to be General Secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention Party. Nkrumah's arrest instantly transformed him into a national hero. The Gold Coast was one of the richest colonies in Africa. Diamonds, gold, and cocoa were its main exports. Its early history was dominated by the slave trade. Nkrumah himself came from a small village near the old slaving forts of Elmina. In the 1930s, he managed to make his way to the United States to study. While in the U.S., he was influenced by African-American scholars and black nationalist pioneers.
In British West Africa, the Gold Coast produced 1/3 of the world's cocoa beans.